When I talk about my church, the one with the big red ribbons, people go, oh, I know that church.
That ribbon was a beacon of hope and of compassion for so many people.
It was our beacon to the community out there that they were welcome.
The congregation here at Hollywood United Methodist is such a grand mix of everything, just because of this sense of welcoming. What I like to say that our congregation is what heaven's going to look like, because it's everyone.
A mystery disease known as the gay plague has become an epidemic unprecedented in the history of American medicine.
At that time, the messages across the country from various religious leaders was that AIDS was God's punishment on gay people.
No, this is a medical problem and it will have a medical solution, and God is not that kind of a God. If we really are followers of Jesus, then how can we possibly even imagine that God would punish his children?
I was aware of other gay clergy, but it was not safe to be out. In fact, one of my friends, colleagues who did come out was brought to trial.
I came here as a minister's wife in June of 1985. Men started getting sick. They were young, in their 20s and their 30s.
These are the days in which barbershops and salons closed their doors to gay folk because they were afraid of catching something.
Well, you know, there was so much hate out there, and basically we need love in our heart.
People were scared. Nobody would hug, you see, nobody would touch. It was almost a case of, they're lepers.
And we had members who were getting the disease.
But there was a distancing because we were like, can you catch this? How do you catch this? Because no information was going out.
The other churches in Hollywood, the Catholic Church, the Presbyterian Church, they really wouldn't accept people to worship with them, people that were living with HIV and AIDS.
I did my internship here in 1986 when the AIDS crisis came home to Hollywood United Methodist Church. I knew at that time that my ministry was going to include working for full inclusion for gay and lesbian folk.
This memory came back of a woman who was in our church, and I'm guessing she was about 65, maybe 70. And she had her cane, and she was trying to walk, into the sanctuary. And she was holding up a 30-year-old young man, Lyle Loader, who was in his last stages of AIDS, and I couldn't see who was holding who up better.
Lyle Loader was the first person diagnosed with AIDS in this congregation. He lived until December of 1987. And in that time, I got to know one of the most amazing men who had a call to ministry that had been denied by the church because of his sexuality.
That was heartbreaking for us when Lyle was passing away. We couldn't go in. It was, everyone was gloved up and masked up, and there was a lot of fear in the hospitals.
But when I would come to church and they began to talk about it here, and in a loving, nurturing, comforting way, my heart melted. You didn't expect that.
We had a statement that we were in ministry to persons with AIDS, their families, and their friends. We had already a ribbon inside the church. We thought that we needed something outside.
And then in 1993, it was decided, hey, how can we send a signal that's public? Well, we have the tower.
Not everybody originally was on board.
Obviously, there were many meetings before it was finally accepted that we would do that. It wasn't the kind of thing that I could just go out and put them just because I say so.
Specifically, when it came time for the vote, we both said, will this vote mean that we're a gay church? And the congregation unanimously said no. And so that helped the vote. We did lose several families.
I must admit, I was part of that side. How can we do this? It's going to change everything so radically. It was a growth period for all of us. And I had friends that had the same feeling. Some people left
but they did come around. Not all, but those stories, whenever it happened, it just felt wonderful, you know.
But those of us who stayed and worked it through, we were far the better for it. We just hope now that we did enough at that time, because there was so much to do.
And at that time, it was a ribbon.
It was a team effort to do all of these things, and it was a team effort to get the ribbons up on the tower. And I had on a pair of leather gloves. If I hadn't had any gloves on, it would have cut into my hands. But I left that to the other people, and I got my camera out and was taking pictures. Well, John Ochoa was standing on a ladder, and all the sponsors were gathered around, so we did a group shot. I'm glad that I was able to document this.
We raised up this metal piece that was covered with plastic and cloth.
The ribbons, they were flimsy.
It was so hand-me-made. I mean, this was like crazy. Then one day, the wind came and it blew it off the tower. When the ribbon blew off, the wires snapped. And in fact, we kept the flimsy frame once it was finally removed.
Members from the church carried the ribbon during LA Pride.
And great people who got behind us being able to put up something that was more permanent on East and the South Side.
People would say, "What's that for?" It's an AIDS ribbon. It's honoring those who have gone on. And they said, "Oh, you go to that church?" Yes, I do.
So I remember getting out of my car and looking up at the church tower. And there's a sense of pride. It's happening again right now. It takes your breath away. I felt proud for my friends who had passed. I felt like it was an honor to them.
People holding up signs, "God hates fags," and we're holding up signs promoting love and acceptance. And I love the fact that certain people get confused by us as a church and our red ribbons, because churches are not supposed to do that, when in real life, it's exactly what we're supposed to be doing.
And we would take calls telling us that we were all going to hell. We were called heretics. We were called devil worshipers. You name it, we were called it.
I have always thought that the cruelest thing that you can do to someone, anyone, is to tell them that they are not allowed to have a relationship with God.
It is fear. And they were stoking the fires on fear.
Dan Shepard.
Our church became the Los Angeles hub of the Names Project, creating hundreds of panels for the AIDS Quilt, each panel honoring a loved one lost to AIDS.
They said, "Does anybody know how to run a sewing machine?" And I said, "Yeah, I know how."
All these quilters, all these sewing machines out making panels.
They would come in, they'd bring little things, pictures or an old t-shirt or little pieces of memorabilia about these people.
The panel was the size of the cemetery plot.
We had it hanging in the long clotheslines in the church. What meant a lot to me. I felt that I was doing something and felt my worth.
The panels were carefully packed and shipped to Washington, D.C., where they were displayed on the National Mall alongside 40,000 other names of people who passed from AIDS.
So I was watching this real-world reality series, but the key element was Pedro Zamora, who openly said he was gay, but also that he had AIDS.
One of the most memorable memorials was the one for Pedro Zamora.
The Zamora family felt it very important to be here. This is a place where the AIDS ribbon is.
They asked me to officiate at the thing.
This was a huge deal.
But he always reminded us that he was living. And he said, you know, until the moment I die, I'm living with AIDS.
I have a memory of a young man who came Christmas Eve service, and he had come because of the AIDS tower, the ribbon on the tower. And he hung around after the church, sat in the back row in the dark, all alone, crying. And I was ready to lock up. And I went to him, and he started crying some more and telling me that he'd been kicked out of his home, that he was living with HIV. Eventually, he died, like so many back there in the 90s. But he knew something about God's love for him before that happened. And it's because of that ribbon on the tower.
Like my mother said, people never die as long as you remember them in your heart.
His name was the Owl, and that was a beloved name for him.
It broke my heart when my best friend, the Owl, passed away. He was quite a character to begin with. The Owl told me, he says, I made a pact with God. And he says, I wanted to live to be 50. He died 5 days after his 50th birthday. The Owl took care of a lot of his friends that were passing with HIV and AIDS. And this one day he told me, you know, with all these carvings, there's no owls. So I took it upon myself, and I made the 2 little owls that are way up in the high altar.
Okay. To this day, I look for the owl that we kind of snuck in, and the owl is there, ever watching that we're doing our job.
The Owl's roommate were back in Washington, D.C. at the mall, and they tracked down and found the Owl's panel.
So when I returned in 1997, there was a banner in the sanctuary that had the names of people who had passed from AIDS.
And I can remember being really crushed when the banner came down, because I didn't know why it had come down.
Sadly, the list of names kept growing. We need to shift this banner so it becomes a plaque so that names can be added to it.
One of the names on that plaque is the Reverend Dick Clemmer. Dick was the pastor of the largest United Methodist Church in New Mexico. Discovered he had AIDS. He was removed from his position. His orders were stripped. So he came out here to Hollywood. In 1990, I gave birth to my first son. Dick was very sick at the time. I wanted to baptize my son here in this church where I'd been married. So that September 1990, Dick Clemmer baptized my son James. It was the last baptism or sacrament he ever performed before his own death. And we held vigil at the hospital for him night and day. At the end, we held hands, we sang around his bedside, and we sent him into glory because we know where he is.
I remember leaving that room heartbroken for that man, that precious man who deserved better.
The red ribbons on the tower, it means that we are, the hands and feet of God, helping to bring forth love in this world, and the red ribbons are a manifestation of that.
There is no way you can approach this building and not notice that.
This is so right. This is what we need to be about.
And I think we've become beloved because of it.
Even if they didn't come through the doors of the church, the ribbon meant everything. It made a difference in so many lives. You have a place that you can be where it's safe and you will be loved, no matter who you are.
Our red ribbons aren't really red anymore. Now they're faded back down to sort of, I say it looks like we're supporting eggplants.
The red does fade over a period of time.
It needed a good paint job. This morning it's been painted a glorious bright red.
We believe that all are welcome in this place, no matter who you are, no matter whom you love. This is who we are because this is who God has created us to be.